Welcome. In this presentation, I discuss three frameworks that have shaped contemporary career counseling practice: trait factor theory and the theory of work adjustment, Holland's RACEC typology, and Super's lifespan, life space theory, and its constructivist extensions. I will trace the historical origins of each framework, evaluate the supporting research, and translate theory into concrete counseling strategies. I will also discuss critical perspectives on how well these frameworks serve diverse populations, including women, racial and ethnic minorities, and neurodivergent clients. By the end, you should be able to describe, compare, and apply all three frameworks in counseling practice. All three frameworks share a common logic. Fit between person and environment is central to career satisfaction. Where they differ is in their unit of analysis, their time frame, and the role assigned to the counselor. Trait factor theory focuses on measurable traits and environments at a point in time. Holland's RIASEC model classifies both people and work environments into 6 types and uses congruence between them to predict outcomes. Super's developmental approach views career as a lifelong process organized by life stages and the evolution of the self-concept. Each framework offers what the others do not, which is why counselors in practice routinely draw from all three. This slide traces the trait factor tradition to Frank Parsons, who opened the Boston Vocation Bureau in 1909 and published Choosing a Vocation the same year. Parsons's formula was elegantly simple: know yourself, know the world of work, and reason clearly about the relationship between the two. In the 1930s, E.G. Williamson and the Minnesota Point of View formalized this into a systematic counseling framework. Post-World War II, large-scale assessment programs expanded the approach to a mass audience. And in the 1960s, Dawes and Lofquist developed the theory of work adjustment at the University of Minnesota, the most rigorously elaborated descendant of Parsons's original vision. The central assumptions of trait factor theory are straightforward. People have unique, measurable traits, including aptitudes, interests, values, and personality, that remain relatively stable over time. Occupations have identifiable requirements and patterns of reinforcer use that can be assessed and compared. The degree of fit between person and environment predicts satisfaction and success. Importantly, the early test and tell model has evolved considerably. Chartrand's 1991 interactive approach repositioned the counselor as a collaborative partner, not simply a diagnostician. The theory of work adjustment formalizes this fit logic into 4 key constructs: correspondence, satisfactoriness, satisfaction, and tenure, capturing fit from both the employee's and the employer's perspective. The theory of work adjustment is the most formally elaborated theory in the trait factor tradition. What distinguishes TWA from simpler fit models is that it assesses fit on both sides of the equation. The counselor evaluates both the individual's vocational needs and abilities and the occupational reinforcer patterns of the work environment. TWA also introduces the concept of adjustment style, how flexible, active, or reactive a client is in coping with a mismatch. Different clients manage incongruence in fundamentally different ways, with direct implications for intervention. This framework is particularly relevant to vocational rehabilitation, where disability affects both the ability profile and the vocational need profile. John Holland spent 4 decades developing his theory, emerging directly from his work as a vocational counselor. His definitive 4th edition was published in 1997, and between 1953 and 2011, over 1,970 publications cited it, making Holland's the most researched career theory in history. His core claim is deceptively simple. Most people resemble one of 6 personality types, and work environments can be classified along the same 6 dimensions. 3 structural concepts give the theory its predictive power: congruence, the match between person and environment; differentiation, how clearly defined the type profile is; and consistency, whether the top 2 types are adjacent or opposite on the hexagon. The RIASEC hexagon is the geometric core of Holland's theory. The 6 types are realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. The hexagon encodes meaningful psychological relationships. Adjacent types, such as realistic and investigative, are more similar than types directly across from each other, such as realistic and social. This geometry supports predictions about congruence, consistency, and differentiation for any client profile. Every major career assessment derived from Holland's framework, including the Strong Interest Inventory, the Self-Directed Search, and ONET occupational classifications, is organized around this structure. When you work with clients on career exploration, this hexagon will serve as your primary conceptual map for interpreting results. Donald Super fundamentally reframed career development. Beginning with the psychology of careers in 1957, he shifted the field from a single occupational choice to the lifelong implementation of a self concept across multiple roles and stages. His 5 life stages growth, exploration, establishment, maintenance, and disengagement provide a developmental roadmap, though not a rigid one. The life space archway model is equally important. The left pillar represents psychological traits, the right represents socioeconomic context, and career development occurs at their intersection. Fuad and Arbona noted in 1994 that Super explicitly built structural barriers into the model, recognizing that environmental factors open or close opportunities, a point we will return to when we discuss diverse populations. After Super's death in 1994, Mark Savickas reformulated the theory in a constructivist direction. Career maturity assumed age-graded developmental readiness. Career adaptability reconceptualizes planfulness, exploration, and decision-making as ongoing, developable resources, not tied to any specific age. This matters enormously for clients with nonlinear career paths. Savickas also introduced career construction theory, a narrative approach in which vocational identity emerges from the stories clients tell about their lives. The career story interview uses 5 structured prompts to elicit recurring themes, pointing toward vocational direction. Sampaio and colleagues in 2025 documented significant gains in vocational identity across 43 counseling cases, with a dose-response pattern observed. This comparison table is a useful reference as you study for comprehensive examinations and prepare for practice. Notice how each framework positions the counselor differently. In Trait Factor, the counselor acts as assessor-diagnostician. In Holland's framework, the counselor guides exploration. In Super's framework, the counselor functions as a developmental facilitator. Primary tools also differ. Trait Factor relies on ability, values, and interest tests. Holland centers on the self-directed search and ONET. Super employs the Career Development Inventory, Career Maturity Inventory, Career Adaptability Scale, and the Career Story Interview. Understanding these distinctions will help you make intentional, theoretically grounded choices with different clients. Now that we have surveyed the theoretical landscape, let us turn to the evidence base. As counselors and emerging scholars, it is essential to understand not only what each theory claims, but what the research tells us about whether those claims hold up under empirical scrutiny and what actually produces change in career counseling. The Trait Factor tradition has the most developed assessment toolkit in applied career psychology. Research demonstrates that person-environment fit across ability, values, personality, and interest dimensions consistently predicts job satisfaction and performance. The theory of work adjustment has been validated across multiple occupational samples, with correspondence between individual needs and job reinforcers as the strongest predictor of satisfaction. Outcomes improve when assessment is paired with a genuine therapeutic relationship rather than a simple test and tell approach. Oliver and Spokane's 1989 meta-analysis found that intensity of intervention was the strongest predictor of career counseling outcome across all approaches. One limitation: the rational decision-making model may underweight emotional, relational, and cultural dimensions of career choice. The evidence base for Holland's theory is the largest in career psychology, though the findings are nuanced. Congruence consistently predicts the direction of outcomes but not the magnitude. In 2020, Brown and Lent described it as a necessary but not sufficient condition for vocational satisfaction. The hexagonal structure demonstrates cross-cultural validity, with the rank order of types stable across racial and ethnic groups. A key practical finding: the self-directed search used alone increases the range of options considered but does not improve decision-making self-efficacy or reduce indecision. Counselor facilitation consistently improves outcomes beyond what the instrument alone can. The SDS functions best as an entry point to structured exploration, not a terminal intervention. Research on Super's framework highlights both its strengths and the power of its constructivist extensions. In 1984, Trebilco found that schools with structured career programs achieve significantly higher gains on the Career Development Inventory. Choi and colleagues in 2015, drawing on over 4,600 participants, found that 1 to 2 career interventions over 2 years produced the highest outcomes, with more frequent participation showing diminishing returns. Santilli and colleagues' life design intervention showed sustained improvements in adaptability and career decisiveness at a 6-month follow-up, underscoring the value of building adaptability proactively during stable periods rather than only in crisis. Regardless of theoretical orientation, 5 elements consistently improve career counseling outcomes. Written exercises produce stronger results than verbal exploration because writing consolidates self-knowledge over time. Individualized feedback, meaning personalized interpretation of assessment data within a genuine counseling relationship, drives substantially better outcomes than group reporting alone. Accurate current occupational information is essential, and clients need skills to evaluate that data critically themselves. Modeling and exposure through informational interviews and job shadowing build vicarious self-efficacy and broaden aspirations. Social support building, strengthening clients' networks of peers, mentors, and family improves follow-through on career decisions. Individual counseling produces the strongest outcomes per unit of time. Group approaches are more efficient at the population level. With the research evidence in view, let us turn to practice. How do we apply each framework in a counseling session? In this section, we walk through practical models, assessment tools, and specific counseling strategies for each theoretical approach. The classic Parsons sequence has been elaborated into a 6-step counseling model. Step 1 is self-analysis, gathering data on abilities, interests, values, and personality. Step 2 is synthesis, integrating data into a coherent client profile. Step 3 is diagnosis, determining whether the concern involves difficulty with choice or adjustment, or both. Step 4 is prognosis, projecting likely satisfaction and success. Step 5 is counseling, communicating findings interactively. Step 6 is follow-up, reassessing as context evolves. What distinguishes mature trait factor practice is Step 5. Counselor and client explore the data together, and the quality of that collaborative relationship directly shapes the outcome. The trait factor tradition has produced the most comprehensive battery of validated career assessment instruments in applied psychology. Effective practitioners draw from multiple domains rather than a single instrument. For ability assessment, the General Aptitude Test battery is widely normed and validated. For values, the Minnesota Importance Questionnaire assesses vocational needs drawn directly from the theory of work adjustment. For interests, the Strong Interest Inventory remains one of the most thoroughly researched instruments in the field. For personality, the NEO Personality Inventory links Big Five dimensions to occupational environments. The critical counseling skill is not administration alone, but the synthesis of results across domains into a coherent portrait that invites dialogue rather than closing down exploration. Holland's most significant practical contribution is the Self-Directed Search, now in its 5th edition. Designed to simulate career counseling without a counselor present, it is self-administered, self-scored, and generates a 3-letter code linked to occupational titles through ONET. With a counselor, it becomes a richer tool, a tend-to-profile shape, not just the top code. A flat profile signals identity diffusion and calls for self-concept work before presenting options. Low subscale scores may reflect low self-efficacy rather than low interest, which calls for a different intervention. Comparing the scored type against aspirational occupations often reveals suppressed interests. The SDS is an entry point to exploration, not a final pronouncement. This slide presents 4 interpretive lenses for working dynamically with Holland profiles, moving beyond the 3-letter code to structured ongoing exploration. For congruence, if the client's code does not match their environment, explore whether adjustment is possible, whether real barriers to change exist, or whether transition planning is warranted. For differentiation, a flat profile calls for values clarification and identity work before presenting options. For consistency, opposite types may signal genuine interest, conflict, or wide-ranging curiosity. Explore both sides. For aspirations versus scores, the occupations clients daydream about at the start of the SDS are data, not noise. Suppressed or unexplored interests often surface there before appearing in the scored profile. Super's framework guides counselors to calibrate interventions to the client's developmental stage. For adolescents in the exploration stage, the primary tasks are crystallizing a vocational preference, specifying a direction, and beginning to implement it. The Career Development Inventory or Career Adaptability Scale helps gauge developmental readiness. For adults in transition, the focus shifts to building adaptability as a proactive resource during stable periods, before a crisis arrives. 2 particularly useful tools are the Career Genogram, which surfaces occupational socialization patterns across family generations, and role salience mapping, which helps clients examine which life roles are gaining or losing importance. Blustein's 1997 perspective also reminds us to address relational and structural barriers alongside developmental tasks. The Career Story interview uses 5 structured prompts to draw out recurring life themes. The first asks who the client admired growing up and what qualities they want to develop. The second asks what they regularly read or watch. The third invites them to tell the story of a favorite book or film. The fourth asks for their favorite motto. The fifth asks for the 3 earliest memories and what they share in common. Your role is to listen for recurring themes across all 5 responses and weave them into a coherent life portrait that illuminates vocational direction and meaning. In 2025, Sampaio and colleagues documented significant gains in vocational identity using this approach. Before we close, it is essential to examine critical perspectives on all 3 theories. The frameworks we have studied were built primarily on data from white, Western, middle-class men. Understanding those limitations is not optional for ethical, culturally responsive counseling practice. All 3 frameworks carry structural limitations that ethical counselors must actively understand. All 3 assume individualistic decision-making, a fundamental mismatch for clients from collectivist backgrounds. Holland's Riesek describes preferences well, but is entirely silent on structural barriers such as discrimination and occupational exclusion, the factors that most powerfully constrain which options are realistically available. Gottfredson's circumscription research shows that gender-based narrowing of aspirations begins in childhood before interests crystallize, meaning inventories may measure already constrained preferences as though they were authentic. Super's original stage model, built primarily on data from boys and men, does not capture nonlinear career paths or work-family conflict. These limitations call for critical awareness and intentional supplementation. Research offers both reassurance and caution for multicultural career counseling. Fuad and Moeller, 2004, confirmed that the Riesek hexagonal structure holds across 5 racial and ethnic groups. However, Fuad and Arbona found that Black students scored lower on career maturity measures than white students, yet those scores were unrelated to actual vocational behavior, suggesting cultural bias in the construct. In practice, supplement Riesek with explicit discussion of occupational access barriers. Adapt Holland to collectivist decision-making by involving family and reframing fit as fit for the family unit. Use Super's life space component to map community roles not represented in the original framework. Women's career development is more complex than classic frameworks acknowledge. Gottfredson's circumscription research shows gender-based narrowing of aspirations begins before interests crystallize, so inventories may capture already constrained preferences rather than authentic vocational identity. Betts's 2002 work identified self-efficacy gaps in mathematics and science that do not surface on interest instruments. A woman scoring low in STEM may be reflecting low confidence, not low interest, which calls for a different intervention. In practice, explicitly explore realistic and investigative areas, address work-family role conflict using life space mapping, build self-efficacy alongside interest exploration, use the career genogram to surface gender role messages, and validate nonlinear career paths as adaptive responses to structural realities. Classic career theories were not designed for neurodivergent clients. Bolte and colleagues' 2024 scoping review of 78 articles confirms this is a relatively new area with persistent methodological limitations. Johnston, Tyler, and Anala in 2015 identified a recurring pattern. Neurodiverse clients are often academically prepared but wholly unprepared for competitive employment. The challenges they face, navigating neurotypical workplace norms, managing disclosure, and securing accommodations, fall outside Riesek or stage model frameworks entirely. Emerging approaches show promise. Narrative career construction counseling has demonstrated gains in self-efficacy. The KDI framework addresses sensory environments and values alignment beyond interest matching. And technology-integrated vocational rehabilitation services have achieved competitive employment rates of 68% or higher for autistic young adults. In our final section, we turn to school counseling contexts. School counselors face the challenge of delivering career development services at scale, often with high caseloads and limited time for individual counseling. How do we translate these frameworks into developmentally appropriate K-12 delivery? Each framework brings distinct advantages to school settings. Holland's RISEC wins on scalability. The SDS was designed for self-administration, the SDS-CE is appropriate for middle school, and web-based RISEC tools show significant gains in self-efficacy. SUPER's framework provides the developmental architecture for school career programs. The ASCA national model draws implicitly on SUPER's logic, sequencing competencies by grade band. Trait factor approaches are harder to scale, but most valuable for targeted work with students with learning disabilities or those facing vocational track decisions. Perrick Fox and colleagues in 2020 found that training adequacy and implementation time were the strongest predictors of school counselor career counseling efficacy. Falco and Stain's 2010 review of 157 studies confirms that structured, theoretically grounded programs consistently outperform ad hoc guidance. At the elementary level, Super guides career awareness. Holland provides simplified type language. Trait Factor supports early interest exploration. In middle school, the SDSCE delivers accessible exploration. Super supports self-concept crystallization. Trait Factor adds values clarification. At the high school level, all three converge in comprehensive assessment, SDS interpretation, and life design approaches. No single theory is sufficient. Intentional integration, grounded in the client's developmental stage and cultural context, is the hallmark of sophisticated career counseling practice. Thank you for your engagement with this material.